All right, I believe this is where we left off with last time, and I believe the video would have been titled A&P May 2nd or May 2B, and this will be A&P May 3rd, or excuse me, A&P May 2nd, letter C then. All right, so as we have air that's going down through the trachea, and I'd be led to believe that some of the structures going into the lungs are perhaps next. Okay, so just like on the trunk of a tree, just picture it being upside down now, because as the tree grows up from the ground, that would be the trunk, okay? So you would visualize the trachea then as the trunk of the tree, as we have this turned upside down now. And then once it splits off into branches, just like a tree does, we see what we call a bronchial tree. It consists of branch airways leading from the trachea to air sacs of the lungs. Now, the air sacs are at the very end of these structures, and again, it would travel through a trachea, a bronchus, okay? And since there's the letter U, it's further up, so that's why we call that the bronchus. Then you have bronchi, the first branches off of this tree. And then what we talked about in class today, the right side is a little more vertical, and the reason for that is because the heart and the lungs sits in that special cavity called the mediastinum. And again, that's what accounts for this being off to one side, being more vertical. Then after the bronchi would be your bronchioles. Okay, even smaller tubes that branch off into off of the primary bronchi. And then finally, one cell layer thick is what we call your alveoli here. Microscopic air sacs which lie within capillary networks. And the reason that it's one cell layer thick is capillaries are also one cell layer thick. So what happens through the natural process of diffusion, oxygen goes from a high concentration in the lungs to a lower concentration inside this capillary network. Just the reverse for carbon dioxide. It's high within the capillary network and flows downhill to a lower area, and that would be inside of these bronchioles as it travels back up in the opposite direction from bronchioles to bronchi, and then to the bronchus, then out through the trachea, and then out through either the nose or the mouth. Okay. And again, perhaps you would have to hit pause on some of these aspects. Just give yourself a little bit of a chance to get caught up. And then this again is what accounts for the left lung being composed of 2 lobes and the right lung being composed of 3. Just because of how that sits in there with that of the heart. Okay. So this is what we had in your diagram that separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity as the descending aorta goes down through and branches off to different organs, whether it's the stomach, the kidneys, okay? And again, the diaphragm is what actually separates those two, and the lungs actually sit on top of your diaphragm. Okay. All right. And just like the heart sits in a fluid sac as well, the lungs do then as well. You have when you're talking about the heart, you have the pericardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium, all three different layers of the heart. Well, the lungs then, as you can see, are no different. You have a visceral pleura, then a parietal pleura, then finally your pleural cavity. Although these are three different areas, not three different structures. Okay, one of the things that we like to talk about in class is that we do not suck air in, okay? When we think of that, it's more so a vacuum. That creates a suction process with a motor. The lungs, however, work in a different aspect, okay? Because that works by a pressure differential between what's inside the lungs and what is in the outside atmosphere. And if you remember, this would be a Boyle's law application, is that as that diaphragm contracts, it pulls the lungs down. So what we would see happening is a decrease in pressure and then an extremely increase in volume, because remember from chemistry class, it's an inverse proportion to where the volume is going up, therefore the pressure is going to be going down. Okay. You could say air is forced into the lungs or flows into. Both of those aspects would be correct because, again, the lungs really do not create a suction process like a vacuum does with that of a motor. I suppose we should say if a person, not a parson. Okay. So then this would be just the opposite, where you have intercostal muscles along with your diaphragm begins to relax. I'll let you get this content down. So then, as you would guess, and what's essentially happening, is that as these tissues begin to relax, okay, muscles of the thorax, okay, as that continues to relax, the volume is beginning to shrink inside the lungs. So since volume is going down, pressure is going up, so then that pressure differential allows air to flow out then. So inspiration, air flows in, and it's no surprise. Expiration, just the opposite. As these muscles contract, the atmospheric pressure raises, or excuse me, the pressure in the lung raises above atmospheric pressure, then causes air to flow out. Okay. And if you remember, the specific structure of the brainstem, of course, was that of the medulla oblongata, then the vital reflex center of the brain. If I had to guess, we're probably about ready to wrap this up. Yes, we're going to be moving on to slide 26 here. And once we get to 28, that is it. Okay. Now, one of the aspects that I want you to, well, again, I'll let you get this content down. So I guess I'm not quite sure how much of this you actually have to write down. So when we think of something like this, like pneumonia can cause something like this. We call this edema. And when someone has been diagnosed with pneumonia, that means they've got inflammation inside their lungs. It's actually in between their alveoli. And that will prohibit or keep the lung tissue from expanding. And it just makes it more difficult for individuals to essentially breathe. And then other types of chemicals that could be inhaled. I guess I don't know if you want to refer to hydrogen as a type of chemical, rather be a type of reaction that could cause that to certainly affect someone's respiratory rate. And then finally, these two. Okay. For some odd reason, it's just the way the man upstairs designed us. There's different ways that cerebral spinal fluid actually detects carbon dioxide levels and hydrogen ions, because this, if carbon dioxide levels begin to go up, okay, that means the blood is becoming more acidic. And what would happen is, throughout the course of, I think it happens in the kidneys, that carbon dioxide, or CO2, would be converted to CO3. And the reason that's important is because when we think of CO3, that is the carbonate ion. Okay? Then if you have hydrogen, now you've got hydrogen carbonate. And with sodium ions, the sodium, the hydrogen, and the carbonate would produce sodium bicarbonate. And that is a naturally occurring base that then would take care of that pH level rising because the amount of carbon dioxide is going up. So then what happens is, as the cerebral spinal fluid sends a chemical message to the brain, and then what happens is it causes your respiratory rate to go up. And if you are breathing in more oxygen, it's also going to cause that to go down because you're also exhaling more carbon dioxide. But there's other ways that the body will maintain these carbon dioxide levels, whether it's causing you to breathe in more or release this carbon dioxide, bring it back down to a normal level through the natural reactions inside the kidneys. Okay. All right. If I'm not mistaken, that does it for this chapter. We have just one vocabulary evaluation, and that is on Wednesday. Try to get these papers done by Thursday. So if you come to class, that is your time to utilize how you see fit to get this content completed. All right, so that is it. In some manner or another, we will catch up to you next time.